Welcome to the Savvy Dentist Podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Welcome back to the Savvy Dentist Podcast, the show where great dentistry does indeed meet great business. One of the things that comes up all the time in the work that I do, helping dentists create a practice and a life that they love, is conversations around fulfillment and whether people are happy doing what they're doing. And sometimes they absolutely are, but there are other times when people might want to take a step to the left or a step to the right and think about what they want to introduce into their life for more fulfillment. And my guest today, Michelle Gibbings, is an absolute expert when it comes to helping people reinvent themselves and liberate their careers. Michelle's bio reads like a who's who. She's got a gazillion different qualifications, several undergraduate degrees. She's got a master's degree, a bunch of professional qualifications. She's also the author of 2 books, Step Up, How to Build Influence at Your Work, and Career Leap, How to Reinvent and Liberate Your Career. So, Michelle, you've worked with tons of people, ANZ, Coles, John Holland, heaps of people, Telstra. And I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to come and hang with us. So how are you?
I'm really well, and thank you so much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure.
Look, I've been looking forward to our conversation for a little while because career change, career leaps, all those sorts of things sound really drastic. And I'm obviously sure that there's a bit more nuance to it than that. But I'm very keen to understand how you found yourself in this line of work, because I'm imagining that it's not a linear path.
It's certainly not a linear path, and I think for me, I have had lots of career leaps into seemingly random careers and industries, and that, in some respects, is what landed me doing this type of work. So if I go back to very early in my career, my first job out of university was politics. I worked as a speechwriter and a media advisor to a member of parliament. And then from there, I went into the mining sector and then into financial services. And I had lots of different, what you'd call functional roles. So I worked in corporate affairs. I became head of compliance for a bank. I was an advisor to the CEO and also to the chief risk officer. I did strategy work. I ran large-scale change programs. So I had done lots of different things in my career. And then I got to, I guess, a decision point where I was in my last corporate gig. I really wasn't having a good time, and I went on a meditation retreat, and it was in that meditation retreat that I thought, I'm done. And I remember coming home and saying to my husband, I'm done with corporate. And Craig said to me, excellent. What does that actually mean? And I said, I'm leaving. I need to do something else. And he goes, great. What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to open a business. And he goes, lovely. And what? I said, I've got no idea. So that was 6 years ago. And so clearly I now have some idea as to what I'm doing. And I realized when I left corporate, I had a very broad base of knowledge. But what I really loved doing was helping people make better choices. So better choices as leaders, better choices as team members, better choices in relation to their career. And so the work that I do is with teams, organizations, but I also do a lot of one-on-one work. And that's either working with them through a leadership lens where I'm helping them craft and really refine the type of leader they want to be so they bring out the best in themselves, bring out the best in others around them, but also often working with people who get to that point in their career and they go, I can't do this anymore. Something's not working and I'm not sure what that is. And people come to me because they go, well, you've done it. We've seen you do this quite random and in some respects risky. I mean, I always thought, to me, it really didn't seem all that risky. But I remember at the time people saying to me, I can't believe you're doing this. You're walking away from an executive role, earning buckets of money, and you actually don't know what you're about to do. You've never been a consultant. You've never run a business. So there was, in some respects, risk attached to it. But my view was, well, I'm fairly smart. I can work things out. Now, we had money in the bank. We were savers, not spenders. And I always say to people, it's very important to make sure you manage the financial side of the equation, because the finances will limit or inhibit some of the choices that you can make. And we had that side of our life set up so that it meant that I had flexibility and I had options. And that had always been our deliberate strategy right from the point when I started working, but also then when I met my husband. We never wanted to be trapped by debt. And so we had made very deliberate choices about things that we did that helped set us up to have freedom of choice. And for me, that's probably one of my underlying philosophies in how I live my life. I need freedom and freedom to be able to choose what I want to do and what's going to work for me and for the people that I love.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And there's a couple of threads here, much like a thread on a jumper that I'd really love to pull on and just see where it takes us. Because coming back to your point about freedom of choice and getting your financial house in order, for everyone listening on the show, you'll know that's a theme that we talk about quite regularly, because getting your finances sorted does mean that you're in a position to choose. So if you want to make a change, then you've got that flexibility to be able to do so. But the thing I'd like to talk about first, and the first thread I'd like to pull, if I may, Michelle, is you mentioned that you help people make better choices. And so when it comes to making choices, where do we typically go wrong? Where do people go wrong?
There's a couple of things. I think often people don't realize they've made a choice. So they're not deliberate about it. They'll either hold back doing something, and not making a decision is still making a decision. You've just decided to not do anything about it. And so whatever the issue is or the problem will fester. They sometimes take too long to make a decision, and the whole mantra, a quick decision is a good decision, doesn't always play out. So you need to be deliberate. When do I make a quick decision, which is based on instinct? When do I really need to sit down and plan it? But also, when do I really need to tap into myself and listen to myself? So if I go back to when I was making the decision about leaving corporate, I was listening to myself, because physically my body was saying to me, when I thought about going into corporate, and probably pretty sort of, not a very pleasant thing to think about, but it literally made me want to throw up. And I remember thinking, I felt nauseous, that whole sense of, I just can't do that. I don't want to get any higher. The thought about going back, I just know that I can't. And so I was really listening to how my body was feeling. And so when I'm working with people and helping them to understand the choices they can make, it's tapping into themselves, really understanding themselves, how they're feeling, what motivates them, but then also working through options. And often people don't understand the options that they've got, and they feel like they've got less options than often they have. And when you work through those options and then get them to think about what's the level of risk you're willing to take, and how much does this matter to you? Because if it matters to you, you're often far more likely to take the risk that goes with that. Whereas if it doesn't really matter, you won't take the risk. And so there's a process that I use when I work through that with people to really help them uncover what's going to be the best choices, and also think long term, not short term. And it can be very easy to make short term decisions that may be okay for the next 12 months, but what's going to happen in 5 years' time, 6 years' time, 10 years' time?
I think there's, again, some really important threads there, because the point you made about not making a choice is still making a choice, and people drifting along, meandering through their life and wondering why they end up at a certain place is probably the manifestation of that. And what I also really wanted to talk about just for a moment is you said that you were able to really listen to yourself. And I'm curious to understand, you were at a meditation retreat. Is that quietness of the mind, is that how you found the space to listen to yourself? And in the work that you do with your clients, how do you get them to listen to themselves?
It's the space.
Yeah.
It's when you don't have anything else that's crowding you out. And I often, particularly when I'm working with execs going through career transition, there's this natural inclination. I have to really, really quickly find my next role, because if I don't find a role really, really quickly, somehow the market's going to move on, and then I'm never going to be employable. And there's a fear that goes with that. And I always say to them, but if you don't slow down, if you don't have time to think, to reflect, to feel, you're just going to do what you've always done, because that's what's easy. That's what you know. It's in that moment of quiet contemplation where your mind is wandering that you go, wow, I wonder what it would be like if I could do this. Or what's that thing that I always wanted to do years ago that I've never tapped into? And I remember when I interviewed a lot of people when I wrote Career Leap, and I was really privileged in terms of a lot of the people that I got access to. And one of the ladies that I spoke with, she is a banker by day, fashion designer by night.
Oh, wow.
And what she found was that she had always had this artistic tendency. It was what she had done all through her childhood and her schooling days. But everyone kept saying to her, you'll make no money. That's not a career. You can't make a career out of this. And so she put the artistic side piece aside. And it was only when she got older that she realized, I'm missing this big part of me. This is part of who I am. I have to go back to that. I've got to find a way to tap into that, because if I don't, I'm not being who I need to be. And she figured that out through a lot of, as she would talk about, soul searching and counseling to really work out what was it that's missing in her life. And so when I'm working with people, I really encourage people to meditate. And I know there's a lot of fluff and hype about meditation and mindfulness. And I remember saying to someone a couple of years ago, you know that mindfulness has reached its peak when you get mindfulness colouring in books at Big W and Kmart. It certainly hit the masses. Yep. And I think in some respects, you don't want people to lose sight of, even though it's sort of seen as popularised, this has been going on for centuries. Absolutely. And I meditate every day. I've been doing it now for the last 4 years. It helps you get clarity. It slows you down when you're stressed. It helps you detach from what's going on and feel like you can manage your way through things. And so helping people find whatever it is that gives them that space. It may not be meditation. It may be running, or it may be exercise. It might be bushwalking. There's so much research that's coming out these days about the real importance of us as humans connecting with nature, because we're part of the natural ecosystem. And so if we don't spend time in nature, that's actually not good for us. So getting out, getting your fingers dirty, gardening, whatever it is that grounds you, all of that helps to create that space. I know for me, I love gardening. I'm not very good at it, but I do enjoy it. I love deheading roses. I often say to people, deheading a rose bush is very meditative, because all you're focusing on is, which next little thing do I cut?
Yeah. Wow. Well, so that's really interesting. I come from a family of gardeners, actually, and unfortunately, they might all be green thumbs, but I have this innate ability to pretty much kill any plant that I come into contact with. So I'll probably need to find something other than gardening. But I wanted to just talk about the quietness of the mind, because meditation has obviously been your strategy. It's also my strategy. It's what I use to get that quietness and that stillness. But when it comes to decision-making and choices, once you've found that peace and quiet, you mentioned earlier that there is a process of weighing up, do I really want this? And what are the risks attached? What else, what other factors should be considered when someone's making a choice? What else do they need to contemplate?
Well, it does depend on what they're making a decision on. So, for example, if they're making a decision about their career, I often get people to think about their career drivers. So what is it that drives you? Is it status? Is it money? Is it flexibility? Is it security? Is it a love of learning and being challenged? So what's driving you? Because that will help work out the piece that's going to be of most interest to you. And then look at parameters. And so when you're making choices about your career, there may be parameters. You may need to earn a certain amount of money, but maybe you could earn less if you cut back on expenses.
Yes.
So what are your lifestyle expenses versus those fixed expenses? Where can you rein in expenditure because you want to create capacity for something else in your life? Are you geographically bound, as in you can only work in one location? Or could you go, well, hey, if a great job came up in Hanoi, I'd quite happily move to Hanoi or move to Berlin or move to the country. So what are the constraints? Because that helps you understand where those opportunities lie and how fixed are those constraints. And then it's you as an individual working through, and there's a series of exercises I take people through to get them to think about their tolerance. It's like a risk appetite. What's your risk appetite for career change?
Yes.
And is that appetite serving you or is it hindering you? And do you perhaps need to get a bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable about the fact that you don't necessarily know where this career step may take you? So there's a process that I take people through to help work through what are the options, what are the constraints, and therefore what are the choices. And then a big part that we talked about before that plays into all of that is finances.
Yep. So that's really interesting, because there'll be people listening to this program who may own a dental practice and may thoroughly enjoy it, or they may want to do something else. There'll be other people who don't own a dental practice and will be wondering what their next career move should be. So what I really appreciate about what you've just given them there, or given the audience there, is a bit of a scaffold to hang some ideas on and to go through a bit of a process. So I wanted to just shift gear a little bit and talk about fulfillment versus achievement, because listening to your corporate career, it sounds like you achieved a lot, but fulfillment was missing. And I suspect that there'll be some people listening to this podcast who might feel that way as well. And so I wondered if we could just unpack that for a moment. How do you know the difference, and how is it, I know it sounds obvious when I say it out loud, but what are the internals that a person would experience in that regard?
Yeah, look, what a beautiful question. If I go back through, it goes back to career drivers as well. So very early in my career drivers were security, so financial security, and love of learning and being challenged. So the love of learning and challenge has always stayed with me. Once the financial security side was nailed, then for me it became autonomy. I wanted autonomy. I wanted to be able to choose what I wanted to do, who I worked with, how I worked, which was the real kind of linchpin in terms of doing what I'm doing now. And the difference between the fulfillment and the achievement piece, if I go back through my corporate career, I had, some really tough times. I had some great times. I worked for some amazing people, also worked for some not so amazing people, but I had a really interesting corporate career, and I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now if I hadn't had that corporate career, because it gave me so much insight and learning. The difference that I have in terms of what I'm doing now, and I remember a person who became a client of mine, but had also known me in my corporate career, and he said to me one day after a session that we had, he said, "Michelle, you're doing now what you were born to do." And I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." I said, "What makes you say that?" He said, "It just oozes out of you." He said, "You love it." He goes, "You've got this incredible insight." He goes, "The way you're able to pull things together, really understand what someone is going through, even though you haven't necessarily been there, and give advice." He said, "It's incredible." And you get so much fulfillment when you're working with clients, particularly one-on-one. And I remember the first time this happened, it was quite early in the piece, and I'd been working with this lady who was having some really challenging situations at work. And at the end of the time that we had worked together, she said to me, "You've changed my life." And I remember getting off the call, because it had been the last phone call we were having. I said to my husband, "Oh my God, I do this for free. This is incredible." Like the kind of the endorphin rush of, wow,
yeah,
I'm actually making a difference.
Isn't that?
And I was having a conversation with someone about that this morning, because she said, "You clearly love what you do." I said, I am, because I know I'm making a difference. I know that I'm doing work that is good work, that's really helping people. And work environments today and life in general, it's big, it's messy, it's complex.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people who are finding it's difficult. There's other people who are really struggling. And if you can just help them a little bit and somehow give them some insights or something that helps them make a better decision or figure something out that works for them, then that's amazing. And what a opportunity and a blessing. I often think I'm so blessed to be able to do what I do.
Yeah, I think, well, you are blessed because you're obviously getting a huge degree of fulfillment from the work you do, and I think that's wonderful. I wanted just to talk about two quick things in a moment, because, again, you're sharing some absolute pearls of wisdom and some real gems. Can I just circle back to the career drivers for a moment? Because you listed off a couple of career drivers, which many of our audience will resonate with: the love of learning, autonomy, money, doing good things for other people, all those other sorts of things. One of the things that I've noticed in the business literature today, and particularly in the entrepreneurial literature, and this is going to sound a little bit perhaps off key, and I don't mean it to, but there's almost like someone doing something for the money is considered bad. And I wanted to speak to that because, again, I think there'll be someone listening to this podcast saying, actually, I'm interested in making money, but I feel awkward about saying that. I wouldn't say it out loud. Can you just speak to that point for a moment?
Yeah, look, it's a bit like the whole word status. There's this sense that there are people who want roles where they have status and authority, and sometimes that's seen as a dirty word, and often status and authority and money go hand in hand. There's a practical reality to life, and often the more you earn, the more freedom you have and the more choice you have.
Yes.
Money, the whole adage, money doesn't buy happiness. What the research shows is a certain level of money does buy happiness.
Yes.
You do need a certain amount of money to be happy. If you don't have financial security, if you don't have the ability to put food on the table and house and clothe yourself and all of that kind of stuff. It has a whole raft of impacts in terms of you mentally and physically. So to me, money is important in the sense that it helps provide choice and opportunity. And I know for me, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now if I hadn't had a successful corporate career.
Yeah.
Because I remember the first year of business, and I joked to my husband, I remember thinking, oh my God, I just earned what I earned first year out of university. Because you're creating a business and you're putting money back into the business, and you might be getting good revenue, but the whole, what is it saying? Revenue is vanity and profit is sanity.
Yeah.
And so I think it's also getting people comfortable talking about money. And I find it really interesting that people aren't comfortable to talk about money.
Yeah,
and it's important to be able to talk about it and what that means, because also when you're running a business, you have to be able to negotiate. And you have to know what your worth is and what's the value that you're bringing to the dynamic. And I often say to people, when you think about a working environment, work is a value exchange. You turn up, you deliver value. And in exchange, whoever you're working for gives value back. They give you money. They give you some type of, might be it's either pay or it's holidays or it's something that is some form of remuneration or compensation for the value that you've offered them. And often in organisations, people say, oh, Michelle, that feels very clinical, very transactional. So that's the working world we live in. It is, we have, as a society, set up a transactional environment. It doesn't mean you don't turn up and you do a bad job. It means you turn up, you do a great job, you add as much value as you can, and you add as much value as you can to the relationships. But you also want to make sure that you're getting paid fairly for what you're doing. And we have this thing, a psychological term called equity theory. And what happens is if we're in an environment and we don't feel like we're getting paid fairly for what we do, our little brain kind of naturally goes, oh, I feel like I need to even the scales.
Yes.
What they found is that people who feel like they're not getting paid fairly will either go slow, so they're less productive, extreme end of the scale, they'll steal. Because they go, well, hang on, this just doesn't seem fair. I'm doing this and I'm giving all this value, and in return what I'm getting doesn't feel fair. And so fairness is a key driver in all of this as well. So I think the more we get comfortable to talk about money, the easier it is as a society, and then in the relationships that you're having with people. I mean, if your mantra is money at all costs and I'm going to screw over my customers to make sure I get as much money as I can.
Yeah, clearly that's going to end badly.
Well, exactly. And so it's about, to me, I've always said to people, it's about honouring the commitments in the relationships that you're delivering, the value that you know that they need, they want, and that they're paying for. I always aim to go above and beyond, but that always pays back because they then refer you on to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes people like the idea of a scorecard, and money is an easy scorecard, right? Because people will say, if I run my business well, then it should make more money, and therefore if I make more money it means I'm doing a good job. And I think for some people who might feel that way, there's, as I said, it's almost like a dirty word to say, actually I quite like making good money because it makes me feel good, it gives me the security or whatever else it gives me choice. But again, reading some of the literature about being purpose driven and all those sorts of things, which is awesome, it almost puts money to one side as something we don't speak about, with something we don't talk about. And I think it's an important conversation to have. So thank you so much for speaking to it. I did want to talk about the complexity of life as well. You mentioned that earlier in our conversation. And sometimes I feel like a lovely linear step-by-step life would be such a joy. But of course, and I'm a very linear person, I like structure and order in my life, but structure and order seem to come in fits and starts for me. And I'm sure it's the same for other people too. So I would love to just understand the complexity of life as it relates to decision making, and particularly around career choices. Where do you see complexity playing a role?
I think we very easily overcomplicate our lives. So my husband and I have a question we ask ourselves before we make any decision that's a fairly big decision. If we do this, will it overly complicate our life? And if the answer to that is yes, then we usually say no, because we don't want a complex life. I look at my life and I go, I love what I do. I love my husband. I love my family. We lead a very simple life. We love travel. So travel is our absolute thing. I work so I can travel, and we go overseas every year. But we don't live in a massive flash house and drive massive flash cars, because in us and us as a couple, that's just not who we are. I remember one time we actually tried to buy an expensive car and we just couldn't do it. We both walked out of the car sale place and I said to Craig, this isn't us. He goes, no, it's not us. But it was kind of fun because we've made a choice that we want to live a simple life. That doesn't mean we don't have nice things and all of that kind of stuff, but we've made real choices about where we want to spend our money and we want to make sure that we have a good retirement. So I see people all the time who do things we go, you've just set yourself up for a whole world of pain and you didn't need to do it. Why would you do that? Mm-hmm. And I think it's getting comfortable to go, I don't need to worry about what other people think of me. I don't need to worry about the fact that I'm living in a suburb that's not the flashiest suburb, or I'm not driving the biggest car, or all of that kind of stuff. It's your value choice. Now, if driving a really big flashy car is what motivates you, then go for it.
Great, yeah.
Absolutely. So just be conscious of the choices that you're making and then really critically examine, do you need to do that? Is that adding to your life? Is it detracting from your life? So I know for me, I love study. And so one of the things I do every year in the business is I go overseas and I study overseas. And there would be some people who go, wow, I can't believe you just spent that amount of money going and studying at the London School of Economics. And next week, I'm going to Israel on a trade delegation. And all of that, though, is for me about the experience of my life. And so I see life and go, I want life to be an adventure full of really interesting, rich experiences. And I'm not going to get that if I do things that overly complicate my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I really love that there is a real tendency for all of us, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past too. I'm much like you, trying to live a simpler life. And I think that increasing complexity in your life just means there's more balls to juggle, more things to think about. And I've been on a bit of a quest now for probably, I'd say the last few years, to try pretty hard to simplify my life with some degree of success and certainly some works in progress as well. But my understanding around that, for me at least, and I suspect I might be speaking for you, but I don't want to, but I suspect that for me that brings a bit more happiness, a bit more fulfillment, and keeps me focused on the things that make a difference to me and to my world. Do you find that as well?
Look, I do. And I also, I have lots of ideas. I have huge amounts of energy. And often,
I can tell.
Be a Saturday night if we're home, my husband will be watching TV and he'll say, can you just sit? Can you stop moving? Because I'll be watching a movie or watching a TV show and I'll be doing other things and getting up and doing stuff and cooking and making stuff and thinking about things. And he goes, just stop. And I go, oh, okay. Yep. So whereas he can be quite happy. So I think he and I really balance each other. And that's a real part of all of this equation as well, is who are the people around you that are supporting you in the choices that you're making? And are they helping you make good choices, or are they somehow leading you astray and making choices that perhaps don't necessarily help you get to where it is you want to get to? But with all of this, it's just taking stock. And one of the things that I do, and I'm like you, I am very linear. And I explained this to one of my clients recently, and I think they almost had a conniption. They said, oh my God, you've got an Excel spreadsheet and you've mapped out the next 10 years of your life. Oh my God, that just sounds awful. And I said, I had to get it out of my head.
Sounds wonderful to me.
I'll share it with you, Jesse.
I would love to.
I had all these things I wanted to do, and it was like, we want to go there, and I want to study here, and I want to start my PhD, and then we want to renovate our kitchen, and then I want to do this in the bathroom, and so I literally thought, map it out.
Yeah.
And so I mapped out the next 10 years, and it doesn't mean I'm going to stick to it, but I've got it mapped out. I've got it mapped against different categories. So I've got categories around finances, with the business, with learning and travel, different experiences, things we want to do with our friends, things in terms of my relationship with Craig, and also for our health. And I just put down against each year things that I'm thinking about doing. Craig really wants to go to the Eurovision Song Contest at some stage. So in that 10 years, at some stage, I'm going to be at some corner of Europe dancing around to Eurovision Song Contest. But it was about going, here are some things to look forward to. And I think that's a really important part of all of this. I love my work. I work really hard, but I need things to look forward to as well, to go, this is why I work hard. Yeah, the work has meaning. But there are times where, even with a job that you love, where you go on a Sunday or an early morning, because I'm an early riser, where you go, gee, sleeping in this morning would have been good.
Yeah, totally. Everyone has those days. Yeah. So just on the complexity thing, I know I'm really coming back to this point over and over again, but my observation is the complexity in our personal life often translates to our business life as well. And I'm working with lots of dental practices, and one of the big things that we're trying to do is to simplify, and focus on the things that actually make a difference. And so what I really love that you've just shared is your ability to get things out of your head and onto a spreadsheet or paper or whatever your method of choice is. I think that's a really good strategy, because I think all of us carry around stuff in our head. And for anyone listening to this podcast, I'd encourage you to do that, not just in your personal life, but in your business life as well. Where do you want to go with your business over the next 5-10 years, and map it out and do what Michelle was just saying, is create a spreadsheet, create a flow or a timeline, and look at what's going to happen when. And I think once you do that, you'll find that it's liberating, because it gives you clarity about what's important. It gives you a path to get there, and you can measure your progress as you go. So again, I think there's also a nice thing about ticking those things off as you achieve them. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And the one thing I would add to that as well is when you're really clear on where you want to get to, it's so much easier to say no to the things that are not going to help you. And there's a lot of noise, and there's a lot of people out there who will try and distract you or want you to get involved in things. And it can be great to get involved, but we only have so much time. And I was only having a conversation with one of my clients yesterday, and they were really struggling over some stuff. And I said, you need to get comfortable saying no. And it's not just no, but it's no with the reason attached to why you can't do it. And I feel much more comfortable doing that. And I know, would have been earlier this year, I was reading Tim Ferriss's book, Tool of Titans, and he talks about how if people approach him for things and it's not what he wants to do, he just won't respond, because his view is, well, they've approached me, I don't need to respond. I haven't quite got to that level. I still think if someone's approached me for something, I want to go back. Even if I don't know the person, I will go back and explain why I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Because for me, I just think that's the nice thing to do, and that's part of my brand and my style. All of your listeners would often face situations that are similar, where you get people asking you to do something and you don't want to let someone down.
No.
Or you somehow worry about, well, if I don't help them, is it going to do this? And you have to, sometimes they can be tough decisions, but just question, do you really want to say no? And do you want to say yes? And what would be the choices and the outcomes when you say yes or no?
Yeah.
And sometimes saying no is liberating.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100 million trillion% endorse that thought. I think it's really good. Michelle, you've been incredibly generous with your time today. And for anyone listening to our podcast, I'd really encourage you to please go and check Michelle's website. It's called changemeridian.com.au. And I've been having a really good look around the website, and there's a heap of things there. There's resources, there's books, there's news and events, a heap of things there that I'd really encourage you to check out. There's a ton of really good stuff there. And I've been reading some of the articles and bits and pieces there. Michelle, we have covered a fair bit of territory. We've gone uphill and down dale today, and it's been a fun conversation, a really interesting and stimulating conversation. So firstly, what I'd really like to say is, in amongst all the things you say no to, I want to say thank you for saying yes to this interview. It's been tremendous. But if you were to leave our audience with one or two salient points, things to consider as they're going about their decision-making, their career choices, seeking fulfillment in their life, if there's any particular pearls of wisdom that you would leave them with, what would they be?
I love the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. She said, one thing every day that scares you. And I like that, because it's very easy to get comfortable. And the scaring part is not, go and jump off a cliff or go skydiving or anything like that. But where are the things where you feel uncomfortable? Because it's when we're uncomfortable, that's when we're learning. And once you stop learning, you're one step closer to becoming obsolete in terms of really adding the value to your life, because the world's changing, and keeping pace with that and being clear about the choices that you make to how you keep pace. And have fun. I mean, for me, life's an adventure, and I want to get as much as I can out of it, but also give as much back as I can. And for your listeners as well, just be clear about the choices that you want to make, and make sure the choices you're making in a changing world are working for you.
Fantastic. Some absolute wonderful words of wisdom. Michelle, thank you once again for taking the time to come and hang with us today. You're an absolute gem. And ladies and gents, once again, please do go and check out Michelle's website, changemeridian.com.au. You can find a heap of stuff there that I know you'll find immensely useful and helpful on your own journey. So again, Michelle, thank you so much for hanging with us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been fun.
It has indeed. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jessie Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessiegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist.